Story 1. Raccoons fighting in my attic sound like demons. Story 2. There was repeated knocking at my door. Each time I checked, no one was there. It really creeped me out. Story 3. It sounded like something or someone was throwing itself against my front door. Our indoor cat had somehow slipped outside, and when her meowing apparently failed to wake me, she repeatedly threw her 20-pound body against the door. I thought someone was breaking the door down. Edit. We had just moved into the house, so the fear was real. I don't know what the cat saw out there, but she has never tried to go outside since then. Story 4. We woke to what sounded like a hammer hitting our backyard fence. My husband and I looked out the window. The fence was shaking and being hit by something. Behind us was farmland, and we thought someone was trying to break in. We called the police. It turned out there were goats behind us practicing headbutting. Thankfully, not all nighttime noises are frightening. Story 5. I've never had a good opportunity to tell this story. When my siblings and I were kids, my sister would go into my parents' room when she felt scared at night. One night, she did her routine and went to wake my mother to make space in the bed. My family has had issues with sleep talking, but that night my mother, still asleep, grabbed my sister's arm hard and then began screaming while hitting her with a pillow. Now both my mother and my sister were screaming. My father woke up, but he was still half asleep and had no idea what was going on. He assumed somebody had broken into the house and was in the room with them. Unfortunately, his body had not fully woken, so when he tried to ask what was happening, it came out as unintelligible gibberish. Imagine me dead asleep, suddenly awoken by a banshee-like scream from my mother, my sister screaming for her life, and my father yelling incomprehensible noises. Of course, I assumed my whole family was being murdered by a madman. Story 6. A Category 4 hurricane is certainly something. Military flyovers are quite the wake-up call, particularly when they are unexpected. Then there was the man who broke into my house. Fear has flavors, as it turns out. Story 7. My son said he felt like he was going to throw up and then projectile vomited on my face. We looked at each other and started laughing uncontrollably for several minutes. It ended well, but waking up to a child at eye level who is projectile vomiting in your face is truly horrifying. Story 8. My husband yelled, "Who the fuck are you? Hey!" while he was fully asleep. Story 9. A police helicopter hovered almost directly above my house. I looked outside and made eye contact with the person the police were looking for. Story 10. The sound of my wife, 9 months pregnant, falling down the stairs. I don't remember getting out of bed or crossing the room. Then I was next to her on the stairs. "Are you okay?" "No. We're going in." "Yeah." I told my oldest, "I'm taking your mom to the hospital. Your little brother is on the way." The hospital bag was already by the door. I practically carried her to the car and called my mom to come stay with the kids while we were at the hospital. Thankfully, she and our son were both fine. She's tougher than she looks. Story 11. One night around midnight, I was awakened by a baby crying outside my window. I had fallen asleep watching television with the lights still on. The sound near my window was exactly like a baby crying. My first thought was that a desperate single mother had seen the light from my window and abandoned her child for me to find. I nervously went outside, fully expecting to see a 1-month-old baby lying in the bushes, but to my surprise it was a cat. It scared the absolute bejesus out of me. I never knew a stray cat moaning in the night could sound so much like a human baby. Story 12. A raccoon got in through the window and grabbed my parrot through the bars of her cage. I woke up to her screaming and chased the raccoon out of the house. I scared it so badly that it urinated on itself. My bird had a severe chest puncture and was treated with antibiotics, but she fully recovered. Story 13. People who were using crack walked down the alley behind an apartment where I used to live, casually discussing ways to kill someone and to take anything valuable from the body to trade for more drugs. It was a surreal moment when I realized I was not dreaming. Stay away from hard drugs, kids. Story 14. A car alarm was going off. I was annoyed and looked out my window to see which car alarm it was. Instead, I saw my neighbor's car engulfed in flames. Now fully awake, I grabbed my cell phone, shoes, and a robe. I went outside and called emergency services after I determined which house was on fire. 3 of us reported the fire, and the fire department arrived quickly. They used a saw to open the hood and extinguish the fire. The truly scary part was that the residents of the house could not connect to emergency services on any of their cell phones, and their landline did not work. They had 4 phones and no connection. They asked everyone who called which mobile providers we used because they were changing providers. Story 15. About 30 years ago, I listened to Art Bell on the radio as I drifted off to sleep. One night, he played audio of a beheading from somewhere in the Middle East. I woke up to the poor soul screaming. Story 16. A car crashed into the front of my house. The driver was intoxicated. Story 17. A mountain lion screamed just outside my tent. It was like the video but 100 times louder and inches from my face. Story 18. My phone rang. A nurse told me my mother had died. I knew what the call meant the minute it started ringing. It was the worst moment of my life. Story 19. Police knocked on my door a couple of times. The first time was because of a loud, intimate situation. I did not realize the window was open and people were outside. They called the police because my girlfriend at the time had a very high voice and they thought I was assaulting a child. It was at least amusing to the officers. The second time was worse. A police officer banged on my door at midnight to accuse me of a crime I had nothing to do with, and that never happened. He was aggressive, kept accusing me, and tried to convince me to let him in and search my things. I told him I had rights and I was not giving them up. A couple of days later, they realized the item reported stolen had simply been misplaced by the person who accused me. Story 20. Multiple gunshots were heard in a quiet suburb, followed by a girl screaming. An older man shot his feuding neighbor in the neighbor's driveway. When the neighbor's daughter ran out screaming, he shot her. 1 man died. The daughter was seriously injured and died a few years later from her injuries. Story 21. I was screaming when our 130-foot maple tree fell onto the house, right above the bedroom. I am so happy the trusses took the impact as they were supposed to, or it would have had a very different ending. Story 22. My infant daughter was screaming after hitting the floor. My husband had passed out in a chair while holding her, and she fell from his arms. I thought my life was over. She cried for 40 minutes. We spent 2 days in the hospital running tests. She had a small fracture in her skull. We spent the next 3 months waiting for her neurological exams to make sure she was okay. She received the best possible score. It was a huge relief. She is 3.5 years old now and a happy, healthy little girl. We are the lucky ones. A lesson for other new parents. If you are exhausted and must hold the baby, sit on the floor so if you fall asleep, the baby will fall only a few inches. Also, do not be ashamed to call a friend, neighbor, or family member to help you for 30 minutes or an hour. Story 23. A woman screamed, "Liar," at her husband. I thought she was shouting fire, and came out in my underwear to look for it. I chased them out of the neighborhood shortly after. Story 24. My smoke alarm went off at 3:30 a.m. the other morning. I was awake, out of bed, and downstairs faster than Usain Bolt. Turned out to be a false alarm, fortunately. Story 25. A magnitude 6.5 earthquake, the Silmar quake in 1971, happened when I was a child. We lived about 8 miles away and I was on the 2nd floor. The roar and rumble woke me first. Then the power transformers exploded and the shaking began. The twisting wood in the house sounded like screaming. I had just read a book about the San Francisco earthquake and expected the same devastation. Fortunately, we had no damage. Story 26. Does a night terror count? Twice, when I was a little kid, I was awakened by the same loud, deep, ghoulish laugh. It rattled my soul. Story 27. A large painting hanging in our apartment fell in the middle of the night. It sounded like someone had kicked the door in. Story 28. It sounded like a car had crashed into the side of the house. The whole house shook. Turned out to be an earthquake. Jesus Christ. I am not joking when I say you could hear the bedrock. It was terrifying to wake up to. Story 29. My neighbor screamed for help when her husband had a heart attack. Story 30. In 1999, at 4 o'clock in the morning on a weekend, my living room television turned itself on at full volume. Batman, the animated series, was on Cartoon Network, and the Joker was laughing loudly. Scared me. I ran from the back of the house to find no one. I have no explanation. I would like to think another person did it, but that is more frightening because I was the only one there. Story 31. Silence. I went to sleep watching my mother, who was sick with cancer, and woke to silence. Worst day ever. Story 32. My alarm clock went off in the middle of the night for work. Story 33. It was not the middle of the night. It was an afternoon nap. My dream ended with the sound of an explosion. When I woke, the last remnants of the sound lingered for a few seconds. To this day, I have no idea what I heard or whether my half-awake brain was still producing the sound as I woke. Story 34. I wasn't asleep but was in bed when I heard a growl. Not a cat or dog growl, but a beast growl. It was the scariest thing I have ever heard. I was staying at my friend's house and trying to sleep in her room while she was at work. The kicker was that she had recently broken up with a man who claimed he was possessed by a demon and the demon wanted her. Yikes. Hail Mary, full of grace. Story 35. When we were growing up, our cat went outside most of the time. He got into a fight with a raccoon one night and survived, but we had to take him to the vet. The vet advised us to keep him indoors for at least a month because the raccoon would almost certainly return. It was summer, and I loved sleeping on our screened-in porch. The raccoon did return seeking vengeance. It howled and growled in the most terrifying way. It was the worst sound I can remember. Story 36. I was sleeping when I heard a gunshot and the siren of an ambulance. I called an ambulance for my mom, who had killed herself. Story 37. I thought I heard my wife call me, and then I swore I heard glass shattering. Turned out to be in my head. Story 38. I was on a writing retreat at an incredible beach house called the Log Castle. I was not exaggerating when I said it looked like it had been built by a wizard. In the middle of the night, I woke to people having an angry conversation outside. Suddenly there was growling, guttural, and very demonic. The angry voices continued, and so did the growling. It was terrifying. All I could think was that the house was haunted, or that the writer in the room next to mine was snoring loudly and strangely. I was too frightened to get up and check, so I hid under the covers and eventually fell back asleep. In the morning, I looked out over the water and saw that the floating dock, which had been empty when I went to sleep, was now covered in lounging harbor seals. They were still making strange, demonic-sounding noises. When everyone came down for breakfast, we quickly realized that everyone had woken to the noises, been frightened, and made the same assumptions I had: ghosts or snoring. It was fun to watch the seals for the rest of the day, but a bit of a bummer to learn that the wizard house was not haunted. Story 39. 3 a.m. High as a fucking 747 trying to hit the atmosphere, watching the second Maze Runner movie. I heard this weird howling and screaming that got louder and louder. It was really annoying. I paused the movie mid-howl to figure out if the movie was fucking with me. The howl continued after it was paused. Later I found out it was a fox howl. It must have been very close. The fucking little fox almost made me shit myself. Story 40. A tree outside was ripped loose by the tornadic winds. The sirens were blaring, and a second after I woke up the power went out. It was very jarring. Story 41. My neighbor was screaming that her boyfriend was going to kill her. It was a terrible experience. Story 42. Two men were loudly whispering outside my bedroom window about exactly what they planned to do after breaking into the house. I was unsure if they were targeting us or the neighbors, but I got up and quickly locked my door. They bolted when they heard or saw me. I did not sleep for days after that. Story 43. The wind sounds like people talking. I live at 10,000 feet elevation, and sometimes the wind gets weird and creepy, can sound like multiple people. The wind has been strong enough to blow the back door off a few times, so the voices in the house will wake you up. Story 44. Do you remember the song from a few years ago called What Does the Fox Say? Trust me, you do not want to hear it. Sounds like a baby screaming. Story 45. My smoke alarm went off. There was no fire and the stove was off. Story 46. I was camping alone with my dog when it started growling around 2 in the morning. Story 47. My dog woke up in a panic, claws scrabbling on the floor. In the dark, I saw what appeared to be a huge spider about 8 inches across. I turned on the light and realized it was only a bat on the floor. I captured it and put it outside. Story 48. Hyuk gluck gluck ack. Pitter-patter of little paws running away. Story 49. One night I fell asleep listening to the Case File podcast and woke up at about 3 in the morning to the answering machine messages that the East Area Rapist and Original Night Stalker, also known as the Golden State Killer, left. He said, "I'm going to kill you." It scared the shit out of me. The second scariest thing was waking up in 2008 at 4:30 in the morning in central Illinois to an earthquake. Story 50. A car crashed into a power pole, immediately followed by lights and sirens and the sound of the fire truck sliding and overturning because the firefighter who was driving suffered a seizure. Then the transformer exploded in an intense green flare. God almighty, I thought it was aliens or something for the first 30 sleep-addled seconds. Story 51. I remember lying in my apartment, living alone, and being terrified someone would break in. I invited a few friends over. One brought someone I had never met. He was hitting on me, but I politely declined. At the end of the night, everyone left and I thought that was it. A couple of hours later my phone started ringing repeatedly. The door buzzer was connected to my phone. The voice on the speaker was that man saying, "Let me in," and "Open the door." I could hear him pounding on the outside door from several apartments down the hall. He sounded increasingly angry. I stayed quiet because I had not invited him back or given any sign I wanted him to return. My dog was going nuts. We lay in bed with the lights off, waiting for it to end. It lasted about 45 minutes and I did not sleep at all that night. For years after that, my dog barked every time I received a phone call. Story 52. My 27-pound Boston Terrier was snoring like a grown man, and I thought someone had gotten into bed with me. I laughed. Story 53. A couple of years ago on Memorial Day, I was woken by what I assumed was a firework nearby. I rolled over intending to go back to sleep, but noticed my bedroom window glowing bright orange. I got out of bed, looked out, and saw the house across the street engulfed in flames from the ground to the roof, with the houses on either side beginning to catch fire. I ran outside and joined neighbors running from house to house, banging on doors to wake people and evacuate the street while sirens blared in the distance. It turned out to be a 5-alarm fire, and 9 houses burned down that night. Story 54. Our mirror fell off the wall. I was awake, but it did not really matter. Story 55. Australian possums run across my roof and then jump into a tree near my window. There is something about the way they run. It does not sound like a cat or another 4-legged mammal. It sounds like a person walking on 2 feet. When you wake up in the middle of the night, it is terrifying to hear what sounds like boot steps clomping on the roof. By the time it jumps into the tree, I realize it is a possum, but for those few moments my heart races. Story 56. I woke to a whining noise under my window. Hum. It went away and I went back to sleep. The next night I woke at the same time to the same sound. Freaked me out. The next morning I went outside to look near my window. I found a dead bird that had been picked clean of its body feathers, which were in a pile beside the bird. I assumed another bird was crying for its lost mate. After I moved the dead bird, the whining stopped. Story 57. My son had night terrors almost every night. I did not sleep because I knew they were coming. He would start screaming and crying and could not be woken. Then he would calm down and sleep the rest of the night. I could not sleep until I knew it was over. Some nights he did not have them, so I spent most of the night awake, anticipating something that never came. Story 58. Someone in the park next to my house was screaming because their loved one had overdosed. Police and medical personnel arrived as I was reaching for my phone to call. The next day, the park was filled with children, which felt surreal. Story 59. I heard the whistle of a fist before it struck me. There was utter silence during the beating as I tried to escape from the apartment my first husband and I shared. No one answered the door, though they all knew about him and his beatings. 25 years later, I realized they were wise not to open their doors. I had asked for a divorce 2 weeks earlier. He broke my ribs, gave me a concussion, and caused another traumatic brain injury. I left him for good, and this was the first and last time I pressed charges against him. Story 60. As a preteen, I fell asleep with my head where my feet would normally be on the floor-level bed of a bunk bed with a T-shaped design. The bottom bed had shelves next to it and was not parallel to the top. A table next to my head held an old Stein mug I had not taken to the kitchen. One of our cats climbed the unhooked ladder to the empty top bunk and knocked it away. The ladder crashed onto the mug a couple of feet from my head and shattered. The sound was so loud I bolted upright and became hoarse. I had constricted my throat in such a violent gasp that I sounded like a 90-year-old chain smoker when I said, "Oh my God, and what happened?" Story 61. I heard what I thought was a gunshot in our house. I told my husband to go downstairs and check. He found nothing and assumed I must have dreamed it. I could not sleep the rest of the night. The next day at work, I remembered the bottle of wine I had put in the freezer to chill before dinner and had forgotten about. The gunshot was the cork shooting off the top, which was better than the alternative. Story 62. My usually very quiet dogs were making whining, soft gruffing, and mewling sounds when I fell asleep on the couch. My husband had gone to bed and passed away. I think they were trying to wake me to let me know. To this day, I cannot sleep if my dogs are upset about anything. Any dog anywhere making those sounds puts me in find and fix-it mode. Story 63. My sleep paralysis is by far the scariest thing. I wouldn't wish it on my enemies. I have never seen anyone during an episode, but it feels like someone is standing over me while I yell for help and cannot speak. Story 64. Phew, this is a doozy. No, I wasn't on drugs or drinking. I wished I could say I was so it would make some sense. I was sleeping next to my ex-husband, who was sound asleep, when I was awakened by someone repeating my name at the foot of the bed on my side. They had their hands on the bed, facing me, one hand opposite each of my feet, pushing down repeatedly on the mattress as they called my name. As I woke and looked down, I saw the mattress moving up and down around my feet, but nothing was there. That was a huge nope moment for me. I couldn't figure it out and wanted an explanation. It wasn't sleep paralysis because I was able to move. I was definitely awake. Weird things continued in that house to everyone, and we still cannot explain them. Two of us are very science-minded, and we tried hard to find explanations, but some of what happened to the four of us defies scientific explanation. Story 65. In 2016, I fell asleep on election night. At 2 a.m., I woke to the sound of Mike Pence announcing that Donald Trump had won the presidency. Story 66. There was a car accident less than a block away. The utility pole close to the curb had been struck, and someone had crashed into it, possibly because they were drunk, texting while driving, or had fallen asleep at the wheel and drifted over the curb. I heard a man yelling at a woman, the woman crying, and sirens approaching. Story 67. Cats were mating outside my bedroom window. I was 8 years old and had just watched Trilogy of Terror. Story 68. The sound of everything on the shower windowsill being swept into the tub. Story 69. I had a portable air conditioner in my apartment. The fan broke while running, and the blade struck other parts of the unit while still spinning at full speed. I woke from a deep sleep and went straight into the fight or flight response. My half-asleep brain thought a special weapons and tactics team was descending from a helicopter and breaking into my building. After I recognized the sound as the air conditioner and unplugged it, I realized I had been screaming. Story 70. A couple of weeks ago, I heard mommy and crying a few times. I thought I was dreaming. I woke up and my baby, who would have said mama anyway, was fast asleep. I ran to the 5-year-old's room and he was also fast asleep. Creeped me out for days. Then I replayed the movie I had fallen asleep to that night to see the ending, and there was a scene that played exactly what I had heard. I had to laugh at myself for that, but I guess it was maternal instincts. Story 71. A ball python farted in the middle of the night. I actually thought someone had slammed into the front door. I am not kidding. It is insanely loud. It is hilarious to learn that it also scares other owners a lot the first time it happens. It is uncommon enough that you can have a snake for years and not know until it happens. Story 72. There were gunshots between 4 and 5 in the morning at my ex's father's house in the middle of nowhere, followed by gravelly screams of, "Die, motherfucker!" It was my ex's redneck father shooting at woodpeckers that were making holes in the house. But he kept missing. He was wearing nothing but his tidy whitties. Story 73. I was wavering between sleep and wakefulness and apparently talking to myself. Hearing my own voice respond to something I was not coherent enough to understand frightened me for a while. Story 74. A wild boar charged me while I was camping at night. I had gone to the bathroom, and on my way back to camp it came running out of the woods. I cannot describe the terrifying noises. Like a huge, enraged wild pig. I was terrified. Update. It did not wake me, but I was half asleep in the middle of the night. Story 75. My mom and I live together. She has been through a lot in life, and although she has never been diagnosed, I don't doubt she has post-traumatic stress disorder. Every once in a while she has a nightmare that terrifies her. Usually it lasts only a minute, but when it goes on longer she makes an indescribable, terrifying sound that can wake me from a dead sleep. When that happens I wake her up, not for my sake but for hers. When she wakes she is combative, as if still fighting someone from the dream. When she finally realizes she is not being attacked, she breaks down crying, and I sit with her until she can settle. Thankfully those nightmares are not as frequent as they used to be, but I would give anything to prevent her from having to endure them again. Story 76. My cousin fell from a bunk bed when we were about 7 or 8 years old, and to this day I cannot forget the sound of his arm breaking. Story 77. A giant tree broke and fell on an apartment a few doors down. I was terrified. Story 78. I would have bet $100 that the refrigerator door downstairs had been opened. I crept downstairs, naked as a mole, to find no one there. I was also high as shit, laughing out loud. Story 79. My dog gave an aggressive growl and alert bark while we were tent camping. He is part husky and makes a lot of sounds, but he rarely vocalizes like this. When he does, I let him do his thing while arming myself and standing guard. So far his protective mode has kept us safe. Story 80. Lightning struck across the street during a midnight storm. I woke already on my feet, sprinting toward my bedroom door, and heard the loudest thunder I have ever heard. Felt like an explosion. Later, every circuit breaker on that side of the house was tripped. I still have no idea how I did not trip and crack my jaw on the floor as I went from running in my sleep to running awake. But it is the only time that has happened. Story 81. I heard soft huffs and grunts outside my bedroom window. It sounded like a middle-aged man on the other side. After a few minutes, I worked up the courage to look. A herd of deer stared back, which was a relief but still creepy. Story 82. Someone tried all the door latch handles on my truck at 3 in the morning. I am homeless and sleeping in my pickup truck. I did not sleep the rest of that night. Story 83. My boyfriend and I were asleep at my house. I woke up around 3 a.m., trying to fall back asleep, when I heard the doorbell ring and my boyfriend said, "Did you hear that?" We both hid under the covers. Story 84. I was in Australia with my grandmother when I was 16. In the middle of the night, she suddenly started screaming. I sat bolt upright and panicked. She said, "My dreams are so silly sometimes." It turned out her dream was about trying to do a math problem and she could not figure it out. Story 85. A creepy childlike laugh when I was around 11 or 12. Looking back, it was probably me laughing in my sleep because my grandmother often told me I did that. It was very creepy to wake up to an unexpected sound of laughter. Story 86. When my mother heard the breaking news of Princess Diana's death, I immediately thought that my father had dropped dead in front of her. Story 87. When I was 18, my best friend and I were house-sitting for my brother and sister-in-law. In the middle of the night, we heard a bang on the floor. We went back to sleep and were woken up again by another bang. At that point, we turned on the lights and were freaked out, wondering what was happening. Then my best friend said, "Wait, shoo, I hear something." We were silent and then faintly heard, "Help me, help me, I need help." Then there was more banging on the floor. We realized it was the neighbor in the apartment downstairs. I am a huge scaredy cat, but my best friend isn't. She said, "I'm going downstairs to help," and opened the door and went down. The whole time she was down there, I was shaking and panicking. She finally came back up and told me what had happened. The woman downstairs couldn't walk. She had gotten up to use the bathroom while using her wheelchair, and the wheelchair had tipped over. She had fallen and couldn't get up. She had been throwing books at her ceiling to try to wake us. My best friend got a job out of it and became her part-time caretaker, but that really freaked me out. Edit. Runner-up was being woken up by a train blaring its horn on the tracks about 15 feet outside my window. I was spending the night at my aunt's house, so it was already strange because it was a new place. When I woke up, I had no idea where I was or what was happening. I never stayed over again because absolutely not. Story 88. The first time my ex-boyfriend brought me to Colorado to camp in Estes Park. We were asleep in our tent when I was startled awake by the most terrifying sound. It sounded like a woman screaming for help. I nudged my ex and said, "I think there's a woman being killed. I'm going to sleep in the rental car." He followed me. The next morning, the owner of the campground drove up on his golf cart and said that if we wanted to see the elk in the open field, it was the perfect time. He told us to grab a coffee and our phones to take pictures. Then my ex said, "That woman you heard screaming was a male elk making his call during mating season." It was freaky. I had no idea they could make such terrifying noises. Story 89. The sound of an earthquake about to hit wakes me every time. I lie there and decide whether it is worth getting out of bed while the entire house shakes. And then I go back to sleep as it slowly subsides. Story 90. Ice fell from a sloped metal roof onto my wooden porch while my roommate was away for the weekend. Not to be dramatic, but I made peace with death before realizing what it was. Story 91. Years ago, my cat saw another cat outside at night and made the strangest wild animal sound. It woke me out of bed, and I came out of my room expecting to see something terrifying. I shut the blinds and put the cat on the floor. Story 92. My dad and I build and work on cars for fun. We have a large property and a garage with a lift and tools, so friends and family often come by to work on their cars. Occasionally, they leave a car here if it needs a more involved repair. A friend had a General Lee replica from the television show The Dukes of Hazzard and left it at our house. It sat long enough that the battery began to die. The General Lee has a very distinctive horn. As the battery drained, it began releasing its remaining charge through the horn relay, which caused the horn to sound. Because the battery was nearly dead, the horn sounded very slowly. Imagine that horn slowed to a quarter speed, echoing across our property at 2 in the morning. It was terrifying because we could not figure out what it was. It played too slowly to recognize the tune. Eventually, we identified it and pulled the fuse. Story 93. The sound of a drunk driver running his van into our downstairs neighbor's porch woke us. Our bedroom was directly above it. He came so close to hitting the house gas line that he broke the glass covering the gas meter. He ran away on foot before the police arrived. Story 94. When I was 11 years old, at 3 a.m., I woke to the sound of 2 men talking down the hall. I quickly went to my mother's room and woke her. She dismantled the coat rack and, wielding the main pole, headed down the hall to my father's study. My father was into amateur radio. He had gone away on a business trip and left them on. The 2 men were talking over the radio. Story 95. A rabbit was killed by a fox while on a solo kayak camping trip in the middle of nowhere. Story 96. Someone was whispering and groaning outside my bedroom window during a stormy night. The police I called did not catch him. Story 97. A loud grinding and crunching at our back door woke us. My husband and I went to the door and turned on the porch light. A mother porcupine and her baby were gnawing at the porch. My husband opened the door and shouted. They waddled away. The mother had her quills raised. Story 98. A bottle of soda exploded in the freezer. Sounded like a bomb. Story 99. I heard glass shattering as if someone was breaking into my house, but when we checked, everything was fine. Apparently, I was dreaming. This has happened a few times, and it sounded very real. Story 100. The neighbor's child was sleepwalking and started crying. Story 101. A pack of coyotes was howling, and one was about 5 feet from my tent. Story 102. Lightning hit my apartment building. Everyone was fine, but it was incredibly loud. I was jolted awake from a deep sleep, my heart pounding in my chest. I am not normally a deep sleeper, so being jarred awake made it worse. Story 103. Someone tried to break down my door on the first night I lived alone in a new apartment. Story 104. Glass breaking woke me. I live in an apartment and heard a window shatter in the unit across from mine around 3 a.m. I called the police. They came to investigate, held my neighbor at gunpoint, and threw him to the ground. He had been drinking and lost his keys. He had kicked in his own window to get inside and was outside drunkenly inspecting the damage when the police arrived. Story 105. A rabbit was caught by what we thought was a fox, and it screamed continuously with only small pauses for breath for about 10 minutes. An extremely long time at 2 a.m. It must have been running in circles in the vacant, bush-filled blocks across from us. We laugh now, but that sound still gives me shivers. Story 106. A loud bang came from my closet door in the middle of the night at our new house. It turned out the cheap doors the flippers put on all the closets bang when temperatures fluctuate, such as at the start of winter and in mid-spring. We are used to it now. Story 107. I have exploding head syndrome. It sounded like an explosion right next to me and scared me. It has happened a few times. I hate it. Story 108. Probably my husband's night terrors, such as screaming while asleep or suddenly leaping out of bed. Story 109. My wife woke me up because the wind was getting louder. Windows rattled, the house shook, and tree branches hit the side of the house. We later found out a tornado passed about 500 feet from our house and took the neighbor's barn. Story 110. The sound of wet splashing as my dog had aggressive diarrhea all over the floor. The smell followed quickly. Story 111. A cougar wanders through a couple of times a year. At 2 a.m., its scream is so loud you would swear Satan's whore is coming for you. Story 112. The ringing of a telephone because you know it cannot be good news at 2 a.m. Story 113. A big tree limb fell on the roof. It sounded like someone had fired a gun. Story 114. I woke up in bed to a huge explosion and thought it was a plane crash. I jumped out of bed, heart pounding, ready to grab my dog and run. I looked out the window and the neighborhood was quiet. I had experienced episodic cranial sensory shock, also known as exploding head syndrome. It has happened to me a few times. The last time I imagined a car crashing into my house. It was terrifying. Story 115. Someone fired a handgun outside our bedroom window. I woke up in a panic and immediately checked myself and my wife, convinced one of us had been shot. Story 116. Someone whispered pissed right next to my ear, but there was no one there. It happened several times during a sleep paralysis episode. Story 117. One night I was hiking on the Appalachian Trail just outside Bennington, Vermont. I was woken by a person's footsteps right outside my tent. The footsteps walked around my tent at least 3 times. I was clutching my knife the whole time. It was around 2 or 3 in the morning. There was no flashlight and I hardly slept the rest of the night. I am sure it was a person's gait. The strangest part was that it did not walk away. It stopped at the bottom of my tent and I heard nothing. At first light I left. I have no idea who it was. Story 118. This rattled my windows. I was 5 miles away. On November 29, 1988, an explosion occurred at a construction site in Kansas City, Missouri, in the United States, killing 6 firefighters. Story 119. I fell asleep watching The Green Mile, which is not that strange because it is a 3-hour, slow, mostly quiet movie. The problem was that the only loud part was the electric chair scene. Story 120. I lived in Idaho for 10 years. from the mid-1990s to the mid-2000s. My passion was backpacking. Sometimes I would go out for days. One hike I enjoyed was to a bald about 4 miles up in the Queens River Range. You could sit on the top of that mountain with forest behind you and a spectacular sunset in front. I had done the hike, set up my camp, watched the sunset, and turned in for the night. I was awakened by a rustle in the forest about 100 feet behind me. I climbed out of the tent. I did not want to be caught where I could not run, and I stood there in the starlight. The rustling stopped, and I heard, to this day inexplicably, a child's voice saying hi. If you have ever been around little children, you will know the voice. Happy, sweet, and, for me, not there. I called, but there was no reply. I rekindled the small fire I had going, made coffee, and watched the stars until sunrise. That was 29 years ago, and thinking about it still raises the hair on the back of my neck. Story 121. A loud explosion sounded in my ear, but when I woke up everything was quiet. Thanks, exploding head syndrome. Story 122. I was sleeping in a chateau in Normandy with the skylight window open because it was a little warm in the room. In the dead of night, I heard a loud scream outside. It screamed twice and then fell silent. It sounded like a woman, but I was not sure because I did not check. Story 123. Footsteps that seem to approach and recede, then repeat the pattern. Story 124. When the closet doors breathe, it freaks me out every time. I wish they were never invented. They always seem to come off their tracks. Story 125. During an episode of sleep paralysis, I heard what I can only describe as a three-toned laugh on the opposite side of the bed. Story 126. Packs of coyotes roamed the Arizona desert. A dozen or so would begin howling and screaming out of nowhere for a minute, then fall silent. They would start again on the other side of the campsite. It felt as if they were trying to build courage and find the best approach. Story 127. A cat in heat was just outside my bedroom window. I almost jumped out of my skin. It was followed closely by the slow, rising wail of an ambulance siren. Oof. Story 128. About 2 miles away, a house exploded due to a gas leak. Story 129. One of those green, fucked up bugs that just jumped on me without my consent at 4 in the morning. My nice ass didn't even kill it. I threw it outside. Story 130. It was my first night in a rental overseas. I had moved in before any other tenants in the shared house. I woke just after midnight to the sound of someone or something running up and down the hallway on the other side of the bedroom. It freaked me out, and I still have not forgotten it after 8 years. Story 131. This was a few years ago. I had a PlayStation 4 that either had a fault or was being triggered by someone else's remote operating on a similar frequency, because periodically it would turn itself on. At the time I had bought Star Wars Battlefront, which came with a package of themes. One of them featured Darth Vader. The theme showed a picture of Darth Vader, and the idle sound was his breathing. One night, at about 3 a.m., I was awakened by a deep, mechanical breathing sound coming from the living room. I live alone and was about 3/4 of a second from rolling out of bed and hiding underneath it. Story 132. The first time I heard a Fisher cat outside, I genuinely thought someone was being murdered in my driveway. Story 133. Cougar in heat. It screams like a person being stabbed. I thought my neighbor had killed a second wife. Long story, but it is in the title. Story 134. Cats fighting at 2 in the morning sounded like demons and woke me up. Story 135. Hearing a fox scream in the middle of the night is absolutely terrifying. There are many of them near my neighborhood. Story 136. My wife and I woke up to a loud bang next to our bed. It sounded like someone had slammed a book down. There was nothing on the floor. We had no pets and no children at the time. We checked the outdoor cameras and found nothing. Story 137. Foxes. I truly thought that there was some unearthly being in my garden. I did not know that animals could make such noises. Story 138. Wake up, a voice whispered in my ear. No one was there. I was alone in my flat. I still remember exactly what it sounded like. Story 139. My son, who had croup, stood next to my bed in a dark room and screamed loudly. Story 140. Not long after moving down to Devon, I was woken one night by horrendous screaming outside my house. Thinking a woman was being raped, beaten, or murdered, I leapt out of bed, ran down the stairs, burst through the front door, and raced down my garden path, only to find a couple of foxes that looked at me before running away. Unfortunately, I was completely naked, and it was not the best way to introduce myself to the new neighbors, some of whom were looking out of their windows to see what the screaming had been about. 20 years later, the lady across the road still calls me the Fox Flasher. Story 141. I went camping on a private campground owned by a rancher. It was a very nice place and the rancher was very friendly. Around 4 in the morning, I heard something large huffing and puffing just outside my tent. I could hear its footsteps crunching twigs. I was sure it was a bear, but I worked up the courage to open the zipper slightly and peek out. It was just a cow. It mooed at me and continued eating grass. I laughed at myself and went back to sleep. Story 142. Back in high school, it was just my dad and me in the house. My mom and siblings were gone for the weekend. I do not remember why. We lived in a wooded area and had 2 cats that we let wander outside during the day. They were always in before everyone went to bed. I could not sleep without knowing they were safe. This was the 1980s. In the middle of the night, it sounded like someone was being murdered in the backyard. My dad and I were both up instantly. We were both freaking out. He yelled, "ICS," and I found P. That was the first and last time I saw my dad in his tidy whities. I later learned the hard way that a distressed rabbit sounds like a human scream. I am pretty sure an owl ate well that night. Story 143. My cat was retching on my bed. I managed to jump away before she vomited on me. Story 144. Muffled crying was how I found out my grandmother had died. Story 145. I heard a cat in heat screaming outside one of my basement windows. I woke up, and my first thought was that someone was being attacked and murdered in my backyard. Story 146. It was my border collie breathing very deeply beside my bed. She scared the shit out of me in my half-awake state. Story 147. I live alone. The snoring sound was my cocker spaniel. Story 148. My son had night terrors almost every night. I couldn't sleep because I knew it was coming. He would start screaming and crying and I couldn't wake him. Then he'd calm down and sleep for the rest of the night. On nights when he didn't have them, I stayed awake, anticipating something that never came. Story 149. An earthquake rumbled. I had no idea they were so loud until I was woken in the dark by a magnitude 7.0 earthquake. Story 150. Branches were falling onto the roof. In my confusion upon waking, I grabbed my shotgun, mistaking the noise for aggressive pounding on the front door. I was not ready to fight in a home invasion, so my heart started racing immediately. I found the evidence the following morning. Story 151. I live alone. Hearing someone talk is pretty scary. It was the middle of the night when I learned my cat can say mom. Story 152. A horse screams from behind the fence, accompanied by a wild flute in the background. Story 153. For Australians, a curlew growled, hissed, and screamed beneath the window at 3 in the morning. I have never heard a sound quite like it. Story 154. My 7-year-old daughter yelled, "Mama, a man is in my room." I rushed across the house. He was halfway through the window when her shouting scared him. My husband caught him and held him until the police arrived. He was a teenager who thought he could sneak in and steal something. He swore he did not know it was a little girl's window. It was the only one that opened. That was how we found out the lock did not fully latch. It was also the day I learned how brave and smart my daughter was. She was terrified but said she knew she had to scream. I wouldn't have to fight him long before Mom and Dad got to me. She even snatched the scissors from her end table and had them in her hand. Story 155. My Amazon Alexa device woke me up giggling once. I was terrified. Story 156. 2 mountain lions were mating next to our propane tank. even though there are hundreds of miles of open desert where they could have chosen to be. Story 157. There were 6 gunshots in the street outside my bedroom window at 3 in the morning. Story 158. Someone or something is walking around in the leaves directly outside my bedroom on the ground floor. Story 159. My cat threw up on my bed. I was afraid it had gotten in my hair. The panic and anxiety were overwhelming. Story 160. I was not sound asleep. Sleeping by an open window, I smelled cigarette smoke. Someone was right outside my window and left without incident. Story 161. My daughter, who was less than 1 year old, was not breathing properly. I woke from a deep sleep, pulled her from the bassinet, held her until dawn, and then took her to the hospital. She was diagnosed with respiratory syncytial virus. She is doing great now and is a college sophomore. Story 162. The police called me at 3:30 in the morning to tell me that my then 14-year-old son had taken my car keys from my jacket pocket while I slept, gone joyriding around the city, crashed my car into a telephone pole, and was now in the hospital. Thanks a bunch for sticking around till the end of the video. Remember to subscribe, and until next time, stay awesome and goodbye.